30 consecutive three-pointers, 8 months removed from an ankle injury that silenced entire arenas across the 2025 season. That is what Caitlin Clark walked into Indiana Fever training camp and immediately did. Not in a game, not with the lights on and October on the line. In a drill in practice with her teammates watching 30 straight, and then when the shooting drills wrapped, she turned and fired a one-handed no-look pass to a teammate in traffic, and the player catching it literally looked stunned, not because the delivery was unexpected, but because it arrived at a moment and from an angle that nobody in that gym had processed was even coming. The debate about whether Caitlin Clark was actually back ended the moment that footage started circulating online. The real conversation, the one this channel exists to have, is something far bigger. Indiana isn't just back. They might be the most dangerous team this league has assembled in a very long time. You've seen the headlines, you've seen the clips, but what nobody is connecting right now is just how intentional every single piece of this Indiana rebuild has actually been. This isn't a franchise getting lucky with free agents and hoping chemistry develops on its own. This is an organization that identified every specific crack that showed up in the 2025 Aces playoff loss, mapped those failures onto the offseason roster, and went out and surgically patched each one with precision. By the time we finish breaking this down together, you're going to see Indiana's 2026 roster in a completely different light. Not as a feel-good comeback story. As a calculated, aggressive championship machine built to dismantle whatever stands in front of it, starting in the first week of camp and ending when someone finally hoists a trophy. If this level of analysis is what keeps bringing you back, hit that like button right now. It signals to the algorithm that this kind of coverage belongs in front of more Fever fans, and it takes you 2 seconds. Let's start where every serious conversation about this team has to start. The ankle, 8 months off a professional basketball floor, is a significant stretch for any athlete, but for a player whose entire offensive architecture runs on split-second decision-making. On reading a defense before the defense is even committed, on throwing a pass before the window physically opens, the question coming into 2026 was never purely about whether bones and ligaments had healed. Those things are measurable. What's harder to quantify and harder to recover is the instinct to be first, the confidence to pull up from 32 feet when your body is still recalibrating the boundary between pain memory and present reality. Some players come back from extended absences and something is just slightly off, the hesitation before a drive, the half-second delay on the release, the subtle overcaution that compounds over possessions until it becomes a pattern. Those things are not always visible. They show up in playoff games. Caitlin Clark answered that question before training camp even opened, and she answered it with stakes attached. Back in March, she traveled to Puerto Rico with the United States national team for the FIBA World Cup qualifiers. She didn't arrive playing conservatively. She arrived as the best player on the floor, against international defenders who had spent months developing specific schemes to neutralize her tendencies. The result was tournament MVP honors. Not a courtesy recognition, not a she looked solid evaluation from a coach trying to protect a star player's confidence. Tournament MVP awarded against prepared professional competition with nothing padded about it. Coach Stephanie White, who was embedded with the Team USA staff and watched the entire tournament in person, confirmed that Clark's timing looked exactly right and that she was letting the game come to her naturally, which is precisely the thing you cannot fake in front of elite defenders during real competition. By the time Indiana's training camp officially opened, the medical clearance was already old news. Clark entered with 0 restrictions. Her own characterization was simple and direct. "I'm 100% go." And when early camp footage showed her stepping away from certain reps, she addressed it herself before it could become a narrative. "Nobody should get hung up on this," she told reporters. She didn't want it to become a storyline about sitting out. That is not a player managing a body that hasn't fully healed. That is an elite athlete treating a 44-game regular season as a long-form chess match, preserving peak performance for October through deliberate, planned management, not through limitation or fear. And when she is on the floor in those intentional full-speed bursts, 30 consecutive threes, no-look passes that left receivers literally looking stunned, she admitted the 2025 injury was isolating and humbling, and that it fundamentally changed how she approaches her own body. That maturity layered onto full physical recovery is a version of Caitlin Clark the rest of this league may not be prepared for. Now let's talk about the roster she's walking back into, because the Clark-only conversation undersells what Indiana has actually built. Kelsey Mitchell entering this offseason had every legitimate reason to test the open market. Her 2025 campaign was the best of her 9-year career, all WNBA first team over 20 points per game, 5th in MVP voting, and the top spot in total three-pointers made across the entire league while shooting nearly 40% from deep. Other franchises were going to call. That's not speculation, that's arithmetic. Players with her profile at her age generate interest, and the open market was real. She came back anyway. Mitchell signed a one-year Supermax deal worth $1.4 million, making her the first player in Indiana Fever history to sign a contract exceeding $1 million. 9 seasons, first ever when she was asked in front of cameras why she returned instead of exploring what other teams would offer. The contract didn't even come up first. She talked about family. She talked about relationships she had built in that locker room that she wasn't willing to walk away from for a paycheck, even a bigger one. That detail matters more than most people have acknowledged, because it tells you something about the organizational culture Indiana has developed under this staff. Players who can leave and get paid more are choosing to stay. Clark called re-signing Mitchell priority number 1 for the franchise, not a priority among several. Priority number 1, that's because the tactical relationship between these two players is not coincidental, and it is not interchangeable. Mitchell attacks downhill relentlessly and forces defensive collapses. When defenses collapse to contain Mitchell's drive, Clark gets open looks from the perimeter. When defenses chase Clark off screens to prevent those open looks, Mitchell gets a clear runway to the basket with nobody in position to help. Neither player operates at her ceiling without the other. Both of them know it, and now the entire WNBA has to figure out how to solve it for at least another season with no obvious answer. The Boston contract announcement landed and Clark pulled out her phone, saw it on social media before it was officially communicated to the team, and said nobody more deserving. 4 years, $6.3 million total salary, immediately jumping to $1 million in 2026. The largest contract in WNBA history signed by a player who is 24 years old. Indiana is not paying for what Aaliyah Boston has already done. They are paying for the ceiling she has not reached yet, and they are locking that ceiling inside an Indiana Fever uniform before any other franchise can make a counter-argument. The context around this deal is larger than Indiana. The new collective bargaining agreement created the framework that made a contract like this structurally possible, and Boston's representation moved immediately once that framework was confirmed. Boston herself did not leverage competing interest as a negotiating weapon. She described Indiana as a fun place to be with an amazing staff and signed because she wants to be there, in a league where players have historically sacrificed significant earning power just to access contracts that acknowledge their market value at all. Boston's deal sends a signal throughout the entire women's basketball ecosystem about what post-CBA WNBA contracts can now look like for players who produce at this level. What Boston actually provides Indiana doesn't show up in highlight reels, and that's precisely why her value gets consistently underappreciated by casual analysis. She defends multiple positions across the front court. She finishes through contact at a rate that most interior players in this league cannot approach. She catches anything thrown at her from any angle under any defensive pressure. And when fourth quarters of playoff games arrive and rotations break down and possessions turn genuinely ugly, Boston is the specific reason Indiana doesn't disintegrate. Clark's response to the signing is not sentimental. It is tactical. Having Boston anchoring the interior means Clark can push pace, fire passes into traffic, and operate at the aggressive end of her playmaking range without constantly calculating whether someone will actually be in position to receive what she delivers. The interior holds, the pace stays high, and Clark's decision-making operates at its ceiling because the structural foundation underneath it is airtight. The retention story extends past the stars. Lexi Hall and Sophie Cunningham both held real open market value entering this offseason, and neither one had to take a discount to justify staying. Hall shot 40% from 3 over the last 2 seasons, while defending the 2, 3, and 4 positions, the kind of multi-positional versatility that generates phone calls from competing front offices because it solves problems that most rosters have. Cunningham shot 43% from the perimeter in stretches of 2025 and had publicly acknowledged wanting longer-term security, which is a completely reasonable position for a player performing at her level. The market was there for both of them. Hall announced her return in a video with Clark filmed at the Masters, with Clark teasing it beforehand with "tell a friend to tell a friend." Hall's explanation for coming back was simple: this is home. Cunningham signed a 1-year deal despite preferring longer commitment because she believes this specific group wins a championship in 2026, and being part of a title roster carries a value that no multi-year guarantee on a less competitive team can replicate. Picture the offensive picture that creates for opposing defensive coordinators. Clark at the top, Mitchell on one side, Hall on the other, Cunningham in the corner, Boston at the elbow. Defenses cannot collapse on Clark's drive without abandoning a 40% shooter somewhere. On the floor, every single possession forces an impossible choice. And there is no good answer to that lineup that any team in this league currently has on their roster sheet. Before we get into the new additions that might actually be the most underrated part of this entire roster construction, I want to put a question directly to you. Which move do you think mattered most for Indiana this offseason? The Boston contract, locking Mitchell back in, or one of the new pieces we're about to break down? Drop your answer in the comments below. The conversation down there has been really sharp, and I want to know where this room lands. Now, the new additions. Because here's the part most coverage has either skimmed over or missed entirely, and it's the part that directly addresses why Indiana came up short when October got serious last season. Monique Billings did not arrive at Indiana Fever training camp as a stranger walking into a new system with new teammates and a new playbook to absorb. That is the single most important thing to understand about why this signing is smarter than it looks on paper. Before Billings ever wore a Fever uniform, she had already played alongside Kelsey Mitchell in the unrivaled league during the offseason. She had already run alongside Caitlin Clark on Team USA. She already knows at the movement and instinct level, not just the conceptual level, where both of them put the ball before it leaves their hands. The learning curve that typically kills new signings in their first month of integration. The month where chemistry builds slowly and costly miscommunications happen in live games. Billings walked into camp having already compressed that curve into the offseason. She arrived ready. Coach White described Billings specifically as an elite communicator on the defensive end of the floor. That is a precise description from a coach who chooses her words carefully, and it matters enormously on a team that has publicly targeted a top 3 defensive ranking for 2026. Elite communication at the defensive position means coverage breakdowns get called out before they materialize. It means 5 defenders moving as one connected system rather than 4 players in a gap on the offensive end. Billings converted 81% of her field goal attempts from 0 to 3 feet last season. When Clark fires a pass to her rolling off a screen, that possession does not end in a fumbled catch or a rushed layup attempt. It ends with 2 points at the rim. She runs transition hard, which aligns precisely with what Stephanie White is drilling into this team's identity. Aliyah Boston specifically pointed to Billings' rebounding and floor running as things that integrate naturally with how the frontcourt wants to operate. High praise from the player who will be sharing that frontcourt with her every night. Then there is Myisha Haynes-Allen, and this signing requires honest acknowledgement of what actually happened to Indiana in October. The 2025 Fever got out-muscled in the Aces series. That is not a subjective assessment. It is what happened on the film when Indiana needed defensive stops against physical frontcourt play and did not have personnel willing to match that physicality. The cost of that deficit showed up in a number that should make every Fever fan deeply uncomfortable. Kelsey Mitchell finished the series so worn down, from absorbing contact without real frontcourt support, that she developed rhabdomyolysis after Game 5. That is a severe muscular breakdown condition caused by extreme physical exertion. A thin roster literally damaged one of Indiana's most important players on a cellular level during the most important games of the season. Haynes-Allen is the direct architectural response to that failure. She is one of the most physically imposing players in the league, the kind of frontcourt presence who does not just absorb contact but actively courts it, who makes opposing post players feel the difference from the first possession of the game. White called out her vocal defensive presence specifically, noting that her communication should eliminate the coverage breakdowns that burned Indiana in high-leverage moments last season. What that means operationally is that Aliyah Boston gets protected from absorbing the full physical load of every opposing power forward for 35 minutes a night across a 44-game schedule. So when Game 5 of a playoff series arrives and Indiana needs Boston operating at 100%, she is there, not compromised by accumulated physical wear, not running on fumes. The design intention here is transparent once you trace it back to the specific problem it solves. Every piece of this roster addresses a named failure from 2025. None of this is accidental. Before we continue, if our coverage has been your go-to for what's actually happening inside this league beyond the surface-level takes, consider joining the channel as a member. Your support is what makes it possible to keep going this deep on stories that deserve more than a 45-second highlight breakdown. The Raven Johnson story generated more social media heat in the first 12 hours of training camp than any actual basketball development did, and that gap between the discourse and the reality is worth examining. Indiana selected Johnson with the 10th overall pick, and within hours the narrative machinery pivoted immediately to the Iowa-South Carolina college rivalry. Clark and Johnson played against each other in games that were genuinely loud, genuinely physical, and genuinely intense, the kind of rivalry that does not stay politely contained to the court during the moments that matter. So when a clip surfaced appearing to show Johnson walking past Clark without returning a high five during a team drill on day 1, it got screenshotted and turned into a full locker room crisis by accounts that had clearly decided the story before they watched the footage. Aliyah Boston, who knows Johnson personally from their shared South Carolina years, went on her podcast and shut it down with one sentence. Fans always have more beef than the players actually do. Clark and Johnson both addressed it publicly. The college rivalry exists in college. Both of them moved past it faster than the social media threads pretending otherwise could keep up with. What Johnson actually brings that Stephanie White specifically wanted is measurable: 1.5 steals per game in her senior season, while fouling only 1.6 times per game. That combination, aggressive ball pressure with disciplined foul avoidance, defines elite perimeter defense. She attacks the ball without putting opponents on the free throw line, which is precisely the kind of perimeter presence Indiana was missing when teams pushed pace against them in 2025. Johnson herself said training camp was very competitive, and that the veterans, Cunningham, Mitchell, Hall, Carter, were teaching her the system, and that she was asking questions constantly. That is not a player creating friction. That is a rookie working to earn her place. Justine Bizard is the selection that most observers filed under Depth Chart Project when the pick was announced 25th overall. That assessment was wrong. She is 6 feet 4 inches with a wingspan that analysts have measured approaching 7 feet. That physical profile prompts double takes from scouts in person because the proportions look almost unusual at full speed. One analyst drew a direct dimensional comparison to Breanna Stewart, and that is not a comparison you deploy casually. It signals that the physical tools exist at the elite tier of what this league has ever seen. On offense, Bizard can release her shot over virtually any defender in the WNBA, because the league simply does not have many players capable of getting a hand high enough to meaningfully contest her release point at that height. 6'4" perimeter shooters who can also handle the ball do not grow on trees in women's basketball. But the camp footage generating genuine attention is not her offense. It is what she is doing defensively, and it is not what most people expected from a rookie with that frame. She is using her wingspan to force difficult shots, tip passes mid-flight in drills, recover laterally after drives, and contest at the rim in ways that most 22-year-olds at that size haven't learned yet, because they are still developing the body awareness to move that frame efficiently at game speed. Analysts project her defensive ceiling somewhere in the range of Sophie Cunningham or Breanna Stewart defensively, with serviceable foot speed for her size. Coach White now has a genuine decision point developing in real time. Manage Bizard's minutes to protect her development timeline, or let the rookie earn her way into the rotation herself based on what she keeps showing in practice. Based on the footage, that second option is becoming harder to ignore. If you found this breakdown valuable and you want to share it with someone in your Fever community before the season tips off, now is the time. This roster analysis doesn't stay relevant forever, and the people around you deserve to go into this season with the full picture. Here is where everything synthesizes into the championship question. Stephanie White entered training camp with one specific defensive benchmark in her head: top 3, not top 5, top 3. In 2025, Indiana ranked 7th defensively with a 104.3 defensive rating. Jumping 4 spots in one offseason is not an incremental improvement. It is a structural transformation. But White is not guessing about what that jump requires. Her Connecticut Sun teams produced a 96.4 defensive rating in 2024, which led the entire WNBA. She has already built the best defense in this league. She is bringing the same demanding standard to Indianapolis and now has the personnel to actually execute it at scale. The offensive and defensive visions reinforce each other in a way that creates compounding difficulty for opponents. Pushing transition pace creates scramble situations that Clark's passing instincts absolutely consume. The faster Indiana plays, the harder it becomes to guard them on either end simultaneously. Clark is operating at full speed in intentional bursts across camp. The no-look passes are back and operating at the level that made her so difficult to prepare for. The full shooting range is completely functional, and the communication between her and the front court, particularly with Billings, who already anticipates her release, is visible even in early camp footage. When Clark stepped in front of cameras on NBC and told reporters flat out that she thinks Indiana is going to be the favorite to win it all, that is either the purest form of competitive confidence or a deliberate attempt to set the psychological frame for how this team collectively sees itself entering the season. It might be both simultaneously. After tracing every roster decision back to the specific 2025 failure it was engineered to correct, after watching what the training camp footage actually shows, it is genuinely difficult to construct a counterargument. Indiana is not necessarily the most individually talented team in the WNBA on paper. What they may be is the most complete. They have a healthy, motivated MVP-caliber playmaker managing her body like a professional who understands the difference between a regular season and a championship. They have the largest contract in league history, anchoring the interior. They have a backcourt pairing that makes each player measurably better because the other one exists. They have frontcourt depth, specifically designed to absorb the physical punishment that broke them down in the most important games of last season. And they have a head coach who has personally produced the best defense this league has seen in recent memory, and who is explicitly demanding they reach that tier again in a playoff series. Complete tends to beat talented Indiana, spent an entire offseason making the case that they are positioned to be both. Subscribe and hit the notification bell right now, because what this team does between now and October is going to generate the most important analysis this channel has produced. Our next video is going to map out the 3 teams most capable of stopping Indiana before the finals, and what a realistic path to beating this roster actually looks like. If you want that breakdown before the season tips off, you need to be subscribed. We'll see you there.